mama, dada is a sequence. Getting our kids to walk is the sequence of one leg after the other. We go to school, we teach them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Somebody's been to school. So we could even do it backwards. We could do 5, 4, 3, 2. So we understand that life is about sequence. We understand we can't have cookies till we mix the dough and roll it out and cut it out. I love this one. We showed this a couple of weeks. Next little slide. First, people are babies. This is somebody asking in school about sequence. First, people are babies. Then they learn to talk, walk, eat at the table. Some of us are not good at that at the minute. And sing songs. As they get bigger, they learn to ride a bike. They grow up to be big or a grown-up. And so that's the law of sequence in a nutshell. Doesn't matter what we do, whether it's musicianship or sport. It could be trying to get your money out of the ATM. Could be, or your safe. Anybody got a safe at home? Don't put your hand up. That was a trick question. And so, because we'll all be right, this is in the World Wide Web, remember? So everybody's like, oh, they've got a safe, we'll break in. But if you could have £1 million in your bank, but if you forget your PIN number, you're in trouble. Anybody ever goes, this may be just a senior moment thing, anybody ever go to the ATM and think, what's my PIN number? Scary, isn't it? For a moment, and then, oh, you remember. So, even with the telephone, and this is where God really spoke to me about this message as a shared. I was trying to ring home from Tenerife, and I'd got 2 digits back to front and wondered why I couldn't get through. And I felt the Holy Spirit say to me, because of the law of sequence, if you don't get the sequence right, then there's a consequence, or there's the law of consequence. And so sequence, as we realize, is a set of related events, movements, or items that follow each other in a particular order. Well, we understand that. We've looked at some of them. God initiated the law of sequence right in Genesis 1. We looked at this a few weeks ago. We saw how the earth was without form. It was void. It was dark. It was messy. And all of a sudden, God began a sequence. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, etc., etc. Then he created man. But before he created man, he created a place to put the man. Isn't that right? Like if you're having a baby, that baby room's getting all prepared and all ready. You don't just think, because you know the baby's coming because of the law of sequence. You know that in 9 months or whatever your date is, that baby's coming. So you don't all of a sudden the day the baby arrives say, for goodness sake, how did that happen? I wasn't expecting that. It's called expecting a baby. So you don't think, well, where are we going to put this child? You don't go up to Tesco's and ask for an apple box to keep you going in the meantime. Do you get the nursery ready? Because we understand the law of sequence. And so God prepared a garden to put his man and woman in, and actually made these seismic changes to the world as it was to create a sequence of events that made it ready for the man. And that has been happening ever since. So if we cooperate with this law, we bring order and stability into our lives. If we don't cooperate, we make life complicated and difficult for ourselves. Jesus gave us a couple of examples of some of these sequences that we need to have. First of all, seek, aim at, and strive after his kingdom and his righteousness, his way of doing and being right. Imagine God has a way of doing and being right. Be handy if we could discover that, wouldn't it? Especially as Christians and church folk. Then all these things taken together will be given you besides. And so the background to that was Jesus was saying, don't worry about Porsches, don't worry about money, don't worry about clothes, don't worry about mega holidays. Do all these, seek first the kingdom, and then these things, the things that you need, will be added onto you. There's an order, there's a sequence. Jesus also said, love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and intelligence. We thought that was an iffy one for us. But this is the most important, the first on any list or any sequence. But there's a second set alongside it. Love others as well as you love yourself. And Jesus said on these 2 commandments, everything else hangs. So there's a sequence. Love God first and then love others. Because we can only love others as we love God, and he corrects us and deals with us and sorts us out. Then otherwise we love people with a twist. Because if we've got a twist, if we haven't allowed God to deal with us, then we love people with those rose-tinted glasses, or that squint in our eye, or that log in our eye, or whatever, as Jesus talked about. So for every sequence, there is a consequence or a consequence. We saw that consequence is something that logically and naturally follows from a previous action. And we said last week, if we're sitting in the slough of despond, or whatever it is people say, feeling everything around us is a disaster, and we've made a lot of bad decisions, it's not a surprise that we're there, is it? Because those are the consequences of the decisions that we previously took. So there's always a sequence and a consequence, sowing and reaping. I love this verse, but I never understood it. Well, I sort of understand it. Cast your bread, Ecclesiastes says, cast your bread upon the waters, and it will return many days hence. You ever try casting bread upon water? It just goes soggy. So this has to mean something. We shouldn't take this literally. But what it means is, if we will cast our bread, if we will give, one translation says, if we will be charitable to others, God will make sure we have plenty when we need it. Isn't that good? So that's the law of sequence. People say, oh, I tell you, I'll give to the church when I win the lottery. Dodgy. But did you buy a ticket? People say, oh, when my boat comes in, well, did you send the boat out? Your boat's not going to come in if you didn't send it out. Duh. So there's always a law of sequence. 2 + 2 equals. It never changes, does it? We could do this all day long. 1 + 3 equals. Well, how does that work? I thought 2 + 2 equals 4. 2 + 4 - 2. I'm keeping them simple for my benefit. But we understand we can operate within the law of sequence in so many areas, and yet sometimes we miss it in the realm of the Spirit, or in God's world, if you like. Here's a great law of sequence. Paul said this to Timothy. Godliness plus contentment equals great gain. That's a great equation, isn't it? I love that equation. Godliness plus contentment equals great gain. Paul said, I've learned in whatever state I am in to be content. I choose Hawaii. Hawaii's a great... No, Paul didn't say that. I'm saying that. Hawaii's a lovely... If you've never been to Hawaii, I would recommend it highly. And so that would be the state I would choose to be in. Anyway. Here's a good one. The Bible doesn't say this, but it's true. Let's say it together. Eat it today, wear it tomorrow. If you don't get it, you're overweight. It's called the law of sequence. So the Bible gives us keys for the sequences of life. We're not going to have time to look at all of them today, but we're going to have a quick look at some of them. The Bible gives us keys. The sequences of life helps us understand that the consequences or consequences that they wait, good or bad. So we can see the Bible teaches us stuff, and really they are those sequences of life, and we can understand them, we can read them, and we'll say, if we do this, there's good consequences. If we do this, there's bad consequences. Look what it says in Proverbs 18:20. A man's moral self shall be filled with the fruit of his mouth, and with the consequences of his words he must be satisfied, whether good or evil. We could say good or bad. Wow. That's quite frightening, isn't it? Let's read it again. A man's moral self shall be filled with the fruit of his mouth, and with the consequences, or the journeying of the sequences of words that we expel or we say, filled with the fruit of his mouth, and with the consequences of his words, he must be satisfied, whether good or evil. So if our words, if the sequence of our words are biblical, if they're positive, if they're uplifting, if they're encouraging, if they're faith-filled words, well, there's a good chance the consequences will be good. Is that fair? If they're negative, if they're always, oh, well, Saul, remember Saul? He started off, we read about Saul. He said, I'm the worst in my tribe, and my tribe's the worst in in Israel, and Israel's the smallest nation, and it's all doom and gloom. And he didn't change those words. We find Saul came to quite a sad end because he never dealt really with the sequences of words that were in his mouth. And he had to be satisfied with his end. Now, Gideon was similar. It's interesting. Gideon started off, remember the angel came and he was you maybe don't know the story, but Gideon was in a wine press. So a wine press is where you press grapes. You tramp down the grapes to make wine. And it says he was threshing wheat because he was hiding from the enemy. Now, this guy had no wit. Because anybody ever thresh wheat? Probably haven't, but I'll just tell you how you thresh wheat. You get the wheat, and then you throw it up in the air, and then the chaff, the wind comes, and it's built in such a place where the wind will blow, and it blows the chaff away, and then the wheat falls in the ground. If you've been to Africa or been to some of these other nations where they still practice that, you think, wow, that's what that meant. And so when you throw it up in the air, maybe 8 feet, well, you can see the chaff, can't you? But the wine press is probably 4 to 5 feet in height, if you're still in the old money. So here's Gideon hiding in this thing, thinking, you can't see me. He's throwing the wheat up in the air, but so imagine if you're the enemy up in the hill watching this and think, what an idiot that Gideon is. He thinks he's hiding from us, but sure, it's obvious. Or you don't know it's Gideon, but you're saying, bet you that's Gideon again. Because you can see the chaff, and you're thinking, somebody's in there. They're not hiding. So then the angel comes and says, thou mighty man of valor. Well, I say, was that the angel Sarcasticus? Because that is one of the most sarcastic, or it's either sarcastic or faith-filled, or declaring prophetically over him his destiny. So take your pick. Probably the latter, if we're going to be spiritual about it. And so he comes, you mighty man of valor. And what does Gideon say? Gideon said, well, I'm the least in my tribe, and our tribe are useless, and we're the least of the nations. But Gideon changed his words. Gideon actually became a mighty man of valor. Isn't that interesting? So we're not stuck. That's the good news today. We may have been brought up in negative circumstances. We may have been brought up in a negative family. We may have been brought up with negative parents. We may have been brought up with that everything around us was negative. So our words naturally, by nature and nurture, were negative. The good news today is we can change that sequence. That's the power of the gospel. And so we can change that. And so, because otherwise, if we don't, we have to be satisfied, the Bible tells us, with the outcome, with the consequences of our words, whether that be good or bad, good or evil. And so we need to watch what we say. It's so important that we watch the words of our mouth. Let's see another example of that, because sometimes the Bible says every word is established in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. We find this right throughout the scriptures. Here's the story of Daniel. We probably know of Daniel. Daniel was the man who was a man of prayer. He was in the lion's den. You maybe learned some of those stories in Sunday school. He was a faithful man of God. And so he was praying for a particular situation in his nation. Things weren't good, and he was really praying and crying on to the Lord for something to change. And so he had a visit from an angel, probably the angel Gabriel. And he comes and he says, fear not, Daniel, from the first day you set your mind and heart to understand and humble yourself before God, your words were heard, and I have come, look at that, in consequence of and in response to your words. Now, he tells him the whole story. There's a bit of a fight with the Prince of Persia. Maybe you've seen the movie. And so he's saying I was delayed a bit, but actually God was answering, and the consequences of your word moved heaven and earth. caused angels to move. He said, I had to get Michael to give me a hand to fight this prince of Persia. But he said, here I am to tell you, this is what God's going to do. And then he gives them this whole list of stuff that was going to happen prophetically over seasons. And so he said, I have come in consequence of and in response to your words. See, we all have stuff in our lives, don't we? We all have things that we're praying into. Here's the encouragement this morning. We might be saying, well, I've been praying about this for weeks and months, maybe even years. But God's saying, I heard you. I actually will send angels to fight on your behalf because of the consequences of your words. But if we never give those angels anything to work with, if we never give God anything to work with, well, then we're just going to have to fight those battles ourselves, aren't we? And so this is one of my, well, I will say this every week, this is one of my other favorite verses in the Bible because this is powerful. Look at the sequence. He says, fear not, Daniel, from the first day, first part of the sequence, from the first day you set your mind and heart. We want to see the importance of that in a little moment. To understand and humble yourself before God, your words were heard. And I have come in consequence and response to your words. You see, the sequence of our thoughts, words, and actions are so important. That's how it works. You see, look what it says, Daniel, from the first day you set your mind and heart. That was his mind, his heart, that was his thoughts. That was his emotions. He set his hearts and thoughts and emotions on God. Isn't that good? Not in the circumstances. Remember we sung it last week. I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. You see, we need to remember, don't look at the problem. Don't look at the circumstances. Set your heart and mind on God. Humble yourself before God and say, God, I'm in a mess here. And actually recognize it, and I need you to do something about it because I can't do anything about it. So his mind, his emotions were part of it. Then his words, then he said, I've come in as a consequence of your words. We know Daniel's words were spoken in faith. They were spoken in prayer. We know he spoke them out to kings. He spoke them out to different people. And so Daniel was a man he guarded his words. He watched. Just go back just a wee second in this sequence. You see, his thoughts, number one, were important. Then his words were important. He didn't pray, well, Lord, this is a disaster. What are you doing here? He prayed positive prayers. He even believed that God would keep the lions' mouths shut when he was put in the den of lions. And his actions, if you read Daniel at all, you'll see that he was a man of action. When injustice was taking place, he went in before the rulers of the day. In fact, he was a ruler of the day, because even though he was brought in from an enemy camp, even though he was an Israelite, they revered this man. Daniel was a leader through 4 different groups of kings and leaders in the land he was in. And so our thoughts have to be towards God, humbly towards God. Our emotions have to be towards God, not towards the circumstances. Our words need to be faith-filled words. We need to be speaking them out, because then God can do something with them. God can say, right, angels, you need to get angels on assignment. Somebody wrote a book called Angels on Assignment. I don't know who it was, but our thoughts and our words in the right sequence can put angels on assignment for whatever we're needing to happen. That's powerful. And actions. Our actions then need to be godly actions. Our actions need to be in line with the thoughts and the word. You see, there's no point having actions that are contrary to the thoughts and the words. And so very, very important, because these create consequences that are good or bad. So the example, God gave Adam and Eve a sequence. He said, this is a wonderful sequence he gave them. Be fruitful, multiply, fill this earth. Subdue it and have dominion, tend and keep the garden, but don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because the day you eat of it, there'll be death, you'll die. And so there were consequences. If they did what God told them to do, the consequences were good. The consequences were that they would have dominion, they would be fruitful, they would multiply, they would have this amazing garden, they would live for eternity. You see, Adam and Eve weren't created to die. Isn't that amazing? They were created to live for eternity. And God said, this is why, just a warning here, don't go and touch that 500,000 volt electrical socket because you'll get frazzled. We would think, well, that makes sense. That was God's version of it. He said, because here's the consequences. If you do the sequence right, you'll have eternal life. You'll walk with me in the cool of the day. You'll have dominion over the earth. Earth will be a wonderful place, and you'll be the rulers of it. But the consequences, the negative consequences are, if you eat of the fruit of that tree, well, then you're going to have a problem. See what happened? They thought about it. The devil came and began to mess with their thoughts. The devil came and said, hath God said? And they said, well, God has said such and such. They began to think and agree with what the enemy of their soul said. Then they took it a stage further. Then they took the action. They ate the forbidden fruit. And then the consequences were negative. So our thinking, our words, and our actions are always involved. God gave Israel a sequence. He said, because he wanted to bless Israel. He said, bring the whole tenth into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And then he gives them a challenge. He says, prove me. Let part of the sequence of this be that you're proving me that I'm a good God and I'm a faithful God. And then he told them what the consequences were going to be. Most of this is out of the Message, I think. It says, I will open the windows of heaven and pour out the empowerment and anointing and blessing to prosper. Well, that's a great consequence, isn't it? That's a wonderful consequence of obeying God. I will rebuke the devourer off of your stuff. Do you ever feel there's an enemy trying to steal your stuff? Your washing machine breaks down, or you lose a tenner and find £1, or lose 100 and find 20. Sometimes we just feel somebody's anybody ever feel somebody's messing with their stuff? Well, it's maybe your wife or your husband, but your kids, but it could be the enemy of our souls. And so he said, I rebuke the enemy for your sakes. He said, I find this really interesting, because this is the only verse in the scriptures that God says, I rebuke the enemy. Part of the law of sequence of honoring God in our giving is that he'll rebuke the enemy. In the New Testament, we read, you draw close to God, you rebuke the enemy, and he'll flee from you. But in relation to giving, God says, if you will bring the tenth, the tithe, if you'll honor me with your giving, I'll do the rebuking for you. God said, you relax, chill, take a chill pill, sit down. I'm going to rebuke the enemy in this one. You ever have that when you're going out somewhere to buy something, and you say to your friend, they tell a story in Tenerife. Our friend in Tenerife has a story about the island of Gomera. And so, you know the way we always tell jokes about so the Northern Irish tell jokes about the Southern Irish, and the Germans tell jokes about the Polish. And who do the Polish tell jokes about? The Russians. So we all have somebody we tell jokes about. So in Tenerife, they tell jokes about the people from the island of Gomera. And so there was these two guys from Gomera, and they both won the lottery. And so they came to Tenerife, and they were going to buy themselves Mercedes. But before they got to the Mercedes store, they were too early, because the ferry came in very early in the morning. So they went and they bought a coffee. And so they were going to pay the coffees, and one friend said, I'll get the coffees. We've won the lottery here. I'm buying. So that was okay. So they went, Mercedes store opened up, came to the Mercedes store, picked out two nice, whatever they picked out, Mercedes. And so they came to pay, and the guy said, I'm paying, you bought the coffees. So you could put anybody in there, but God said, hold on, you bought the coffees. You brought the tithe into the storehouse. I'm rebuking the enemy on this one. Leave this one to me. The rest of the time and every other day stuff, you rebuke the enemy. But when you bring the tithe into the storehouse, when it comes to your finances and comes to that side of your life, I'm going to do it for you. You just chill. I love that. I love that. And so I'll rebuke the devourer off of your stuff. People will acknowledge my blessing on you. That's part of the sequence. People will call you in the message, I think it is, it says, people will call you a land sparkling with happiness. And that's a wee bit sweet for us Northern Irish, isn't it? It's a little bit sweet, but it's in the Bible and one of the translations. So if you want to be a land sparkling with happiness, or a person sparkling with happiness, will then follow the sequence of bringing God's money into his house. So God gives us sequences for every aspect of life. We haven't time to go into all of these today, but we'll just look quickly at just a few as time is moving on. So if we want to know the sequence for godly life and happy families. Now, I want to say something before I say some of these. I became a Christian when I was 12. Mary became a Christian when she was 12. We have known this stuff all of our lives. We have known this stuff from a very early age. For some of you, you have come to faith. You have come to the Lord later on in life, or at a time after you knew this stuff. So do not be condemned this morning if your family life doesn't line up with this. Don't be condemned, but take it on board from where you're at. This is God's perfect will for humankind, but for all of us, we're all at different stages. And so we've been blessed. I'm very thankful that we were brought up in Christian homes and we came to faith very early. But I tell you, it doesn't matter what age you come to faith and what your past has been, it's your future that counts. And so you take this where it suits you. But if you're a young person, young people are out. But if you're a little bit older than a young person and you're still at the age of maybe forming relationships and wanting to be married and have a happy family, here's a sequence that God has for godly life and happy families. Wives, respect your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. It's very interesting. The Bible does not tell wives to love their husbands. Now, I just don't get that. But God knows us psychologically. The Bible actually said, wives, respect your husbands. So men, we must need respect more than love, in God's opinion. I'm not a psychologist, but who am I to argue with God? And so, wives, respect your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Now, the problem is, he says, as Christ loved the church and laid his life down for it. That's a hard one anyway. Children, obey your parents. And it says this is actually one of the first commandment with a promise. If you want to live long, obey your parents. Fathers, don't provoke your children. Don't aggravate them, it says. And brat. Stephen would never say anything like that. Stephen's my favorite son. I did say my favorite son. I'm wise. Don't marry an unbeliever, the Bible tells us. Don't have sex outside marriage. If you want a godly life and a happy family, that's God's sequence of events. May not be our experience, but let's improve where we can and start where we're at. Sequence for employees. In fact, this was written to slaves and to masters, but we'll adapt it to suit the situation. So sequence for employees, it says, if you're a servant or if you're employed, work as if God's your boss, with respect and with sincerity. One of the translations says, don't do it as an eye pleaser. So in other words, when the boss is there, you're doing all your work. When the boss is away, the cat will play, or when the cat's away, the mice will play, or whatever the saying is. So some people only work when their boss is around, and then when their boss is away, they just are on their computer or Facebook or whatever. He's saying, listen, you're actually, look on your boss, the work you do for your boss, as if you were doing it for God, with respect and sincerity. And it goes on to say in Ephesians 6, because if you do, God will reward you. Which is that's the best reward we can have. It doesn't say you'll get promotion necessarily, but if, I find if we do our work, if we work well, if we're there early, if we leave maybe a little bit later, or at least if we're in time, if we show diligence, respect, and those things, there's a better chance of getting promotion than being slothful and having a bad attitude. Sequence for bosses, it goes on to say this: you masters act on the same principle. So we're not having one rule for one and one for the other. Act in the same principle toward them and give up threatening and using violent and abusive words. This is the church he's speaking to, for goodness sake. That's scary, isn't it? Paul is having to write to the masters in the church and say, guys, I've given a sequence of event for employees, for servants, but this applies to you as well. Act in the same principle toward. Give up. If you're giving up, something means you're doing it. He's saying don't do. He's saying give it up. Give up threatening and using violent and abusive words, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, that there is no respect of persons or no partiality with him. And so the consequence, he's not spelling it out, but he knows, well, you're smart enough, you're a boss. God's in heaven, he's the master, he's going to sort you out one day. Better getting it sorted now. And so God's no respecter of persons. When we stand before God, God's not going to say, well, bosses over in this line and workers over in this line, and the bosses are going to get... No, none of that will count. God's no respecter of persons. And so he was just reminding the masters, the bosses, you just remember there's a day you're going to have to stand before me and give an account of the ability I gave you to be a boss. So have you ever had a horrible boss? Ring that number. So sequence for running our race. Well, we all are running a race. You may not realize it. We are running a race for God. We want to get over that finish line, don't we? So here's the sequence. Lay aside the weight. See, that's why we're doing an addictions class on Thursday night. We're not trying to give you addictions, by the way. We're trying to take them from you. CAP release groups are trying to deal with those weights. I always find it interesting that the apostle, the writer to the Hebrews says, lay aside the weight first and the sin. Sin can be dealt with very quickly. Sin is dealt with through repentance. So if we have sin in our lives, there's stuff in our lives that's sin, we can come before God and we say, Lord, I repent. Be merciful to me, a sinner. I'm going to turn from that. The blood of Jesus Christ, the Bible tells us, cleanses us from all sin. I believe he put weight first is because weights are habits and things that we've allowed to be built into our lives. And sometimes they're just not dealt with instantly. There are ways of thinking. There are ways of doing things. There's things we believe about ourselves. And they actually need a little bit of help sometimes too. And so that's what CAP release is about. And so these why these things are important. These are sequences, ways of helping us run the race of life that God has set before us. So lay aside the weight, the sin that slows you up in God's race for your life. Another part of the sequence, run with patience. And we talked about this last week or the week before. We said patience is not the ability to wait, but it's how we act. It's our attitude while we're waiting. You can wait. I told you the story about me being in the bank. We can wait while I'm waiting. Or we can wait with a good attitude. We can wait with a proper attitude. We can run the race with patience, looking to Jesus. Because it goes on to say he's the author and the finisher of our faith. If we want to cross that finishing line, you see the end of that sequence is crossing the finishing line. If we want to cross the finishing line as Jesus, as the author and finisher of our faith, then we need to follow the sequence. You see, if we give up halfway through, if we become impatient, if we run across a shortcut and don't run the full race, we could be disqualified. I don't know if there's any runners here. You may have been a runner, or you maybe are a runner. You will know there are rules to running. If you run in somebody else's lane, or if you cut 2 miles off the marathon, you're going to be disqualified. And so we have to run, get rid of the weight, get rid of the sin, run with patience, look into Jesus, because we want to cross that finishing line. We don't want to be like this person. I presume this is one of those sumo suit type things, or else this person needs some serious help. But we want to get rid of the weight that would easily beset us. Then a sequence just for a peaceable life. Anybody want a peaceable life? Well, the Bible gives us sequences even for peaceable life. We find these without going into the details in Romans 13 and in Hebrews 13. Honor your leaders in church and in government. Who made you the boss of me? Northern Ireland people particularly, Polish are probably the same. Fijians are very nice. They're very honourable. I found with the African people and the Fijian people, I'm being racist here, this is positive discrimination. But I've found our friends in Africa and in India are very, very honouring. So Mary and I did a service in Africa when we were away in August, and they give us a standing ovation for probably 5 or 6 minutes, which I actually videoed, and after 2 minutes I got fed up videoing it. So, okay, that's dead on, you can sit down now. But such honouring, and listen, we're not asking for that, but it's the principle behind it. And so as a nation, as people in a nation, we need to understand if we want to live a peaceable life, God's sequence for living that peaceable life, part of it is honouring our leaders, church leaders, government leaders. Read those 2 chapters at home when you have time. You'll maybe be shocked if you haven't read them at some of the things that God is suggesting that we do in honouring. Don't steal. Now, remember, he's writing to church folk here again. He said, don't steal. Well, you would think that would be fairly obvious, but there's a whole degree and range of stealing, isn't there? Taking paper clips home from the office. Catherine, did I see you with paper clips? I actually, because I had 104 paper clips in that box, and there's only 103 on Friday afternoon when I checked them before I went home. Don't murder. Well, we actually saw a couple of weeks ago that Jesus said, actually, if you call somebody an idiot, you're murdering, you have murder in your heart. Whew. Don't commit adultery. You would think all these things were obvious, wouldn't you? He goes on to say, pay your taxes, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. He quotes Jesus in this. Render to God what's God. So pay your taxes, pay your VAT. Don't be smuggling red diesel over the border or whatever it is people do. Pay God, bring your tithes and offerings into the storehouse. Because if you do these things, this is a sequence for a peaceable life. Also, another example, he said, if you want peace in your city, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. There's lots of sequences. These are just a few basic ones. But as we begin to put these things into practice in our lives, wherever we are, we will see a change for good. If we put positive sequences, God's sequences into play, wherever our level of starting is, as we begin to do it, we will see things change. May not change in week 1, may not change in week 2. Over a period of time, we will see things happening and changing. We might think, wow, God, to me, I can't see this, but it looks to me as if there's angels on assignment. Because that person who wouldn't respond to me before, that door that wouldn't open before, that situation that was locked before is changing. And so the sequence, God sequences in our lives begin to bring God consequences into our lives. And so next time, we're going to wrap this up. We're going to look at 2 different people because we all love a story about somebody. And we're going to look at the man who got the sequence right and the man who got it right in the end. Because that's encouraging. Because we can learn from the person who gets things right. But I don't know, when I was at school, there used to be people in school and they were brilliant. They're the best looking, the best dressed, the cleverest. We used to beat them up because it really annoyed us. Oh, that's Peter Perfect. But actually, if we had studied Peter Perfect, we could have thought we actually could have had a successful life if we had done what he did, because he was diligent and he did his homework. We wanted to be out kicking football, as my granda would have called it. And so we can learn from people who do it right, but sometimes we think, well, they're Peter Perfect. I'm not Peter Perfect. Peter Perfect picked a pack of That was somebody else. But then there was the man who got it right in the end. And I actually think most of us fall into that category. And probably if you're thinking today, well, I'm actually in the first line, you're probably not. You're probably the person we had to take out the back and give a hand to. You wonder why those red walls are up there. So it's going to encourage us. We can learn from the man who got the sequence right, but we also can learn from the person who got it right in the end. Because it's not how we started that counts, or how we start that counts. It's how we finish that counts. And so as long as we get it right in the end, things are going to be okay. And so the band are going to come, and we're going to, as we worship, it's important that as we worship at the end of whoever's speaking here, that we consider what's been spoken, because always in a service, somebody actually sent me an email during the week to say, you shared something last week and it was for me. And can I come and talk to you and whatever. And most weeks people will say to me, why, you said something there that I've been thinking about during the week, or just confirmed something. And so this is a few moments where we can do business with God. We can say, Lord, there's a few things said there that were a bit close to the bone. There are things that you've been speaking to me about. And maybe I need to go into the prayer room, and maybe I need to get somebody to agree with me. And maybe need to have somebody just even to pray a prayer for me to help me in this next season. Because I want the sequence of my life to be ordered by God's sequence of events. And maybe things have not been good, but I know I can see them turned around. And so we're here to encourage you in that. So let's stand together. Let's worship God. The prayer will be open from now if you would like to go.